Hello, this is John Vincent. Welcome to the John Vincent podcast. We are going to be discovering and exploring both ancient healing and modern medicine. And it's actually all about finding ways, both old and new, to help everybody, I guess both old and new, to enjoy naturally healthy lives. We'll look at the things that modern medicine suggests we should be doing, the things that ancient wisdom and ancient medicine has been doing for a very long time, and also at the exciting hypotheses, the new things, the promising things from emerging science. And good health, I guess, has fascinated me ever since I started a business called Leon, where we asked ourselves, can fast food be good food? And spoiler alert, the answer is it can. But now I guess I want to explore health in all of its dimensions. And we're going to look at the smallest details, but also how all of these details work together to create the whole in harmony. But we're also going to look at the system that all this is working within, the impact on your health of things like politics, economics, cost considerations and profit incentives, and also institutional arrogance and ego that actually get in the way of this harmony. Founding Leon gave me an amazing opportunity. I'm so grateful for this, to work with so many doctors and scientists and nutritionists and healers and practitioners of ancient and indigenous wisdom. And what they told me often blew my mind, but it also helped my mind and therefore also my body and my life. And what I want to be able to do is to share what they've told me and a bunch of stuff that they haven't yet told me with you, and also to meet new people that you and I will be meeting together for the first time. Each of these people have a whole lot of stories to tell, and as you know, there's magic in science, but every new answer invites not just new possibilities, but invites more questions. And so whilst we'll be exploring all of these new ideas, we will also be always keeping a close eye on what it means for what we should be doing, the actual actions we should be taking every day to heal ourselves or to keep ourselves well. And I'm not going to ask you to outsource your authority to these people. I'm going to remind you, and you know this already, that the person that you should trust most in this process is you, because I think you already know instinctively what it means to be healthy. And whilst there's a whole lot of new stuff you'll be learning, I think you are your best doctor, because together we're going to be learning to understand and feel how we respond to certain things, how we respond to different foods or different patterns of sleep or different ways of exercising or getting out in the sunshine. All of these things we can actually learn to assess, learn to understand how those make us feel. And that's going to be critical. And guess what? I don't think that we should be measuring everything all of the time. At Leon, we tried hard to make great food accessible to everybody. And now I'm hoping to do the same with health, helping as many people as possible, regardless of circumstance. And so whether you're a billionaire or whether you're on a tight budget, I guess some billionaires are also on a tight budget, you deserve the opportunity to be well, and I'm going to help you achieve that. Last week, I was in a London train station. I didn't have the time to get to the Leon, so I went into a food shop, and what it sold, you won't be surprised to know, was crisps, sweets, crap chocolate, and protein bars with loads of processed stuff in it. And in conversation with the person that was serving, a man of southern Indian origin, was that he is as depressed selling this stuff as I was buying it. What was interesting, he explained to me that he is a practitioner of Ayurveda, which is as you may know, a very ancient, generation by generation improved healing system from India. And he had, anecdotal I know, just cured himself of a cough with herbs, oils, and nutrition. But it was another reminder of how good people are trying to preserve both their health and these sorts of cultural traditions in a world where it's simpler and it's much more profitable to sell us sugar and processed food, I say food advisedly, than it is to actually sell us things which nourish us. In all the work that I've done in Lyon in business, working with pharmaceutical businesses or advising the government, meeting and enjoying my time with public health bodies, it really has made me conclude that there's a whole bunch of stuff getting in the way of your health. And sometimes it makes me quite frustrated. And our, I guess, cultural arrogance that means that sometimes we all too readily dismiss things like Ayurveda, like Chinese medicine, like indigenous wisdom from South America or Aboriginal wisdom, and even a lot of, I guess, indigenous wisdom from Western Europe as well, herbal medicine that we often too readily dismiss. Those things are rich territory for us optimizing our own health. And just because they're not in NHS guidelines, it doesn't mean that they are potentially not incredibly valuable. And the other thing, as I've alluded to with the train station example, is that I'm afraid the people who are selling us stuff, and not just food, but often medicine, they don't always, I'm sorry to say, have your best interests at heart. And all I can promise you is that I do. Allow me to tell you a little bit about why I care so much about trying to understand the whole. At Cambridge University, I studied anything that would help me join the dots. So I chose to study the history of science, the history of economics, the history of intelligence, as in spying. And I studied why breakthrough ideas are often suppressed, why the wrong scientific ideas perpetuate, and how new ideas are not adopted as quickly as they can be. And I also looked at how countries and intelligence communities seek both the truth, but also seek to often hide the truth, and why economic theory doesn't stand up to reality. So I was particularly interested in how certain paradigms, as in a coherent set of ideas, are often replaced very slowly by the next set of ideas, and how doctors and scientists are often actually dismissed and very frequently actually persecuted in their lifetime. You may be familiar with the work of Semmelweis, who was convinced that germs, as he understood them, all these very small microbes, were killing mothers and babies in a maternity ward that he was involved with. And he actually died a pretty anguished death in a mental asylum, pretty much persecuted and effectively killed for his beliefs. Galileo, another person who was not exactly welcome for his beliefs, was persecuted by the Catholic Church for his idea that the earth actually goes round the sun. And it actually took a whole generation for people to actually agree with him. Often it's said that paradigms change one funeral at a time. And so it takes a long time for good science, science that can actually help you, science that you should be applying. It takes a long time. Often 17 years is the average length of time it takes for something that's proven to actually be adopted by frontline medical teams. So if my time at Cambridge was pretty much focused on trying to join the dots and understand the whole, actually it turned out that I did a pretty similar thing in my first ever proper job, which was at Procter & Gamble, where I worked on a whole bunch of consumer brands. And what became clear was that we had quite a disjointed strategy when it came to what the customer saw. So we had marketing teams doing adverts, we had PR teams, brand teams, point of sale teams, all sorts of people working to try and give a coherent set of imagery and a coherent set of ideas to the customer for our different brands. And yet, at the same time, our salespeople were walking into pharmacies. I was one of them, buying like a fluorescent yellow star, writing "look" with an exclamation mark and turning the O's into I's and sort of double sticky taping them onto the makeup stand. And it made me realize that there was a need for an integrated marketing role, someone that looked at all of those different aspects. And so I had this kind of like access all areas pass. I was able to go to any meeting to make sure that we actually had a sense of the whole. I think it's really important that when we talk about wholeness, we don't mean some kind of grey soup homogenization. And in fact, wholeness should be about retaining and not stamping out any kind of local traditions. At P&G, depressingly, one of our jobs was to take consumer brands like Max Factor or Pampers or Crest toothpaste, Pringles crisps, and actually make sure that every country in the world had the same set of shelves in the supermarkets, had the same advertising. And I think the stamping out of those local traditions isn't always a great thing. In India, for example, for centuries they've used neem sticks, which are both physically good and also from a chemical perspective. The neem is a natural antiseptic. It's one of the best, cheapest, and most ecologically friendly ways to actually clean your teeth. And yet, our job was to replace that with toothpaste, with chemically derived Western-produced toothpaste, and it didn't sit well with me. After 4 years at P&G, I actually moved to a strategy and business consultancy firm called Bain & Company, where my mate Barney worked. I was kind of inspired by the fact that he always had bigger and better hi-fis than me. And the work there involved looking at every last bit of detail in that company, but also trying to work out how that company functioned as a whole and how it functioned within the industry or the sector. So I think I became versed again in understanding how I needed to understand every little building block, but understand how that whole Lego thing worked together. And we got very good at quite good at taking those apart, those businesses, and almost putting them back together again. And it served me to understand not just about the big picture and the little picture, but also about how to balance the short term and the long term, and also to understand the incentives that often end up making those businesses do things that are economically sound in the short term, perhaps not best for either the consumers or the planet. And it got me into understanding externalities. It got me into understanding how the things that you measure when you look at the balance sheet or the value of a company are the internal value. But often those businesses are getting a free ride on the environment. They're perhaps poisoning rivers or chopping down trees or destroying habitats or producing gases that arguably contribute to the destruction of this planet. But they didn't have to pay for those. They didn't have to pay for or measure the value of the impact that they were having on human health. So when my health gets worse because of the ingredients in a product or because of the way that I'm interacting with my phone, or the impact that it has on you or your children, that is just totally not factored into or accounted for in the value of a business. And it started making me realize that incentives are a very, very perverse thing. And incentives can have a big impact on how you feel and how well you are. At Bain, I worked for telecoms businesses, for drugs businesses, for global engineering business, for consumer businesses, for all sorts of companies looking to extract dollar and pound from you. I worked on something called recombinant human albumin, which is where basically you train yeast to make the base plasma protein in blood by injecting DNA actually into the yeast cells. And it was used in combat zones as a volumizer for blood in first aid situations. And it was also used as a stabilizer in vaccines. And we sold it to Merck, to Pfizer, and the rest. Bain helped me understand this. It helped me understand how these businesses work, and it allowed me to understand the big picture. I left Bain to start Leon, but at the same time, I ran a Scotch whisky and spirits business called White and Mackay with my mate Vivian Immerman. And it was another lesson in how to understand and keep an eye on the whole, as well as the individual moving parts. So we took 2 bottling halls and put them into one. We took cost out of the distillery. We rebranded all of the brands, and we focused our international markets much more tightly. But critically, and it was when whiskey became less valuable per litre than water, we decided to buy as much whiskey around the world as we possibly could. And when the price went up 3 years later, that turned out to be a very good move. But again, to understand how the whole sector worked together, how the industry changed and was likely to change over time, was an absolutely critical part of, again, understanding the whole and understanding how all of the things and moving parts work together. Leon was actually fundamentally all about wholeness, and we spoke about the psychological benefit of nourishing the journey towards wholeness. Real food that tastes good and does you good, from farms that we trusted, and with a great sense of sort of community within the team themselves and between the team and the customers. And we wanted to create a feeling of hope that came from this wholeness. And so based on Leon, Henry and I were asked to write something called the School Food Plan for the UK government. And actually, love and wholeness, and you can see this in the actual words that we wrote explicitly within the plan, love and wholeness was fundamental to this plan. We wanted to create a whole school approach for food, not just in the kitchen and the dining room, but also in the biology classes, in the gardens, in the cooking classes. And we wanted the school head teacher to have an overall strategy, an overall approach for what food did, not just functionally and physically, but to the whole school community. What we found was that kids that did not eat together did not get on together. And so what we realized is there was a whole bunch of kids eating their packed lunches over here, often the kids of parents who drove Audis, and then the other kids on free school meals over here, actually creating a kind of apartheid between the well-off kids and the less well-off kids. And suddenly, when we suggested and tried free school meals, suddenly all those kids started getting on together. There was one boy that said to us, look, we used to fight a lot before, but now we eat together. That doesn't happen. And not just socially, but the knock-on effect that it had on attainment, on people actually doing even better at school when they were better fed and when they ate together, was very dramatic. And so that led to us, not because we're right wing, not because we're left wing, recommending on its own merits that free school meals be introduced for all infant kids. And that happened, and it's had a hugely positive effect. About 5 years after the school food plan, Michael Gove asked me to start and to chair something called the Green Business Council, which actually I decided to call the Council for Sustainable Business. And the idea was to support the government's 25-year environment plan. And so I got together a whole bunch of different business people from across different sectors, people from government, and a whole bunch of different experts, trying to see if we could work together to help tackle some of the most pressing issues with regard to the environment. And it was very clear to me that government and business do not talk enough, and that actually not just that, but different departments often compete with each other within government rather than cooperate. So it was my job to see what I can do with Michael's support, very active support, to join these things up. We had things regarding nature, carbon, and plastic. And there's one example of where we worked with the Treasury and with a well-known international waste management company and with other departments to create a whole bunch of incentives that led to this company spending £25 million on a new recycling plant in London. But without that kind of holistic thinking, that would never have happened. Similarly, in nature, a wonderful guy called Justin Francis, who was previously marketing director at The Body Shop and runs something called Responsible Travel, has created a whole nature handbook and a whole nature program allowing businesses to fund and get involved with nature projects that they find most relevant either to their brand or to their own internal culture. So often it takes that kind of joined up thinking, that understanding of the whole, but also understanding the incentives of each little thing, each little part of that whole. It takes an understanding of that actually to make things happen. When COVID, or more specifically the response to COVID, closed down the UK, I was quite keen to keep an eye on what you might call the big picture. So given the fact that Leon had always been about making it easy for everyone to eat and live well, given the fact that we were so focused on wholeness, I decided to do three things. The first was to stay open. I felt that it was the right thing to do, despite every other chain of restaurants or fast food operations closing down. I thought it was important for various different reasons to keep the restaurants open. Certainly not for profit. We lost a lot of money doing so, but I thought it was the right thing to do to stay open. The second thing was with the late Helen McCrory and with Damien Lewis, her husband, and with Matt Lucas, we launched Feed NHS. It was the first and the biggest attempt to feed frontline teams, nurses and doctors and other essential workers in the NHS who otherwise were not getting to eat because everything else was shut. And often a lot of these hospitals had no canteen or no ability to feed their own teams. And in the end, we served 1 million meals with a whole bunch of help from different people within the industry as well. I was very troubled during the pandemic about what I felt the disastrous effects of extended lockdowns. And I had the opportunity, not everyone does, to go on the Today programme to share my views. And I think it's fair to say that not everybody agreed with me. A whole bunch of people decided to, or chose quite rightly, to send me emails with various different four-letter words expressing disgust at my views. However, my view was and is that we didn't fully understand the big picture impact on things like livelihoods, on the ability for us to pay for institutions like the NHS in future, given the financial impact of lockdowns, and critically the impact of the lockdowns on the mental health and the well-being of young people. And so I was really troubled, not just by the lack of clear thinking, big picture thinking, but also troubled by the clear censorship that took place when people tried to have those bigger picture conversations. So I felt we were, on the whole, disastrously ignoring the whole. I sold Leon 4 years ago, and since then I have been building an organisation called The Longhouse, which focuses on starting and investing in businesses that, in my view, contribute to wholeness and to harmony. The name The Longhouse is based on the houses where the families of the Iroquois Confederacy of Tribes, which is a Native American confederacy of tribes, used to live, often up to 20 families actually in these longhouses. So not just does it represent the idea of all these businesses sort of cooperating and working together, but critically, the Iroquois tribe used to think about the impact of every decision on people 7 generations or X generations from now. And so for me, the idea of our decisions being put through the lens of the impact of our descendants is critical. And so what I've done here is I've taken businesses like Winning Not Fighting, which is all about applying the principles of the martial art of Wing Chun to life and to business. Kwoon, which is all about sharing and preserving ancient wisdom. Stuart Trevor, with the founder of All Saints, Stuart, to try and create a clothing company that doesn't make any new clothes, a vegan gluten-free cookie business called the After School Cookie Club, and a company called Invited, which is all about helping foster human creativity. So all of these things have contributed to me trying to pursue this idea of wholeness. But most important to this is the idea for me of understanding harmony and wholeness as it relates to natural health. It's probably the thing I care most about. And so this, the John Vincent podcast, and the reason I called it that is that it takes and it honours and it tries to pursue to help you and me and my family the most important thing that I care about, which is natural health. I once asked someone senior in Public Health England why they still tell everybody that all fats are bad. And I said, well, look, there's 2 things. One is we're not sure the public are smart enough to understand the difference between good fats and bad fats. And secondly, God, we've always said that all fats are bad. We're going to look stupid if we now say that there are good fats and bad fats. So I guess there you go. Arrogance, fear, and a lack of trust in the public also gets in the way. So with this podcast, I've got the idea of toys. Yes, there are new toys that we're getting for Christmas or birthday, and those are exciting, they're new, and they are the scientific breakthroughs that are going to come our way, some of which we will unfold and unpack as we actually meet these people, meet the experts. But then there's the toys that we already own. These are the things that we could be doing, that we should be doing, the things that mainstream or agreed science already knows that we should be doing, but we're not doing enough of. So we're going to look at those as well. And we're also going to think about the trees and the rocks in the garden, those things that nature and previous generations have provided for us. And those things are, in my view, a metaphor for the practices of different cultural traditions, different ancient wisdom that actually we often ignore. So we're going to be thinking about the toys we're getting for Christmas, the toys we could be playing with more, the old toys, and the stuff in the garden, the natural things, the cultural wisdoms, the ancient wisdoms. So let's keep that in mind as we explore and discover both ancient healing and modern medicine. So you will have worked out by now that a big theme, a big hope of mine is that we will be able to look at the smallest of things and the biggest of things. The cell, how that cell informs the organ and how the organ informs the body, and how our mind, our body, and what you might call our spirit are actually potentially all the same thing. And really inspiring me here is the first verse of the Tao Te Ching. Tao Te Ching, you may well have heard of. It's one of two scripts that inform Taoism, which is the ancient Chinese philosophy. Lao Tzu, or someone we think is called Lao Tzu, around 600 BC, wrote the Tao Te Ching. You might have heard one of the least interesting lines, which talks about a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. But there are actually 82 verses in the Tao Te Ching, incredibly powerful. Not always the easiest to understand, but I'm going to read you the first verse. It says this, and this is from a translation by Gao Fu Feng and Jane English. And it says, "The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. The nameless is the beginning of heaven and earth. The named is the mother of 10,000 things. Ever desireless, one can see the mystery. Ever desiring, one can see the manifestations. These two spring from the same source, but differ in name. This appears as darkness. Darkness within darkness, the gates to all mystery." Now, what does that fundamentally mean? It means that the universe at the same time is the eternal nothingness that we cannot fathom or comprehend. And at the same time, manifested, it appears as to what we perceive as separate things: apple, tree, root, or cup, or iPhone, or book. We see these things as very separate, but in reality, they're all very much linked. And I think what's key is that the more we focus on one thing, the more we focus on one cell, or the more that we focus on the apple, or the more you focus on this hand, and how many fingers I've got on this hand pointing up, the more or ignorant of, and the more ignorance there is of my other hand. So I think we need to understand that the more we focus on detail, we create an illusion of separation. We break things down into acres, miles, kilometers, that create an illusion that the land is separate. We create an illusion that things are not fundamentally connected as one, and yet they are. And so I'm going to be definitely focusing on the little stuff, but I'm also going to be focusing as best I can on how those things fundamentally work together. And what's key is we will never truly know that, any more than the hand can grasp itself. Will we be able to actually understand the whole? But we'll be trying to always edge as close as possible to understanding how things are connected. And that's the exciting thing about the John Vincent podcast. I'd like to give you one small example by the way of a story about my left foot. So I had a numbness in my left foot. It wasn't going away. It was kind of bugging me. It was on the sole of my foot. And it was actually becoming quite a preoccupation. And I'd been to see doctors. I had the hypothesis shared with me that it was nerve related or that it was diabetes related. So I was tested for diabetes. I didn't have that. In the end, I was in Africa with Wendy Mandy, the acupuncturist that I write about at the start of this book, Winning Not Fighting. And she took us to meet the Maasai. I'm not going to tell you the story about how amazing it was that the Maasai understood how everything was connected. They understood how, the ground fed the ants, that fed the tree, that fed the monkey, that then impacted the earth. I'm not going to tell you that story. What I'm going to tell you about is the fact that I said to Wendy, I've got this thing on my foot. And she's an acupuncturist, a Chinese 5-element acupuncturist. And she said, yeah, I can make that go away for you. I said, well, yeah, but what is it? She said, look, if I tell you what it is, you won't believe me. So why don't I just make it go away? So she put down the inside of my left foot and ankle and down this foot. She put a series of points. And at one point she put a needle in. It was like someone had put a live electrical cable on the sole of my foot. And that evening it went away 90%. And the next night she said, I'll work on the sister meridian, the meridian on the other side, the outside of my left ankle and foot. And it went away 100%. And I said to Wendy, okay, look, you've made it go away. Can you just tell me what it was? She said, okay, are you sure? I said, yeah. She goes, it's to do with the relationship with you and your mum. I was like, what? She says, yeah, it's a relationship between you and your mum. And then I thought, well, not according to any science that I know. And then I realized maybe there are a lot of things that I don't know.